If I had to kind of define who I am, I would just say somebody who is quietly determined to do whatever it takes to complete a task. But I think that what I pride myself most on is being known as somebody who is 100% reliable.
Okay, welcome to the Journey to Freedom podcast. I'm Dr. B. I'm your host, and just super. I hate to say this every time, but I say it every time because I get so excited about the guest that I get to interview. I tell you guys all the time that I'm the luckiest man on the planet who gets to interview, folks that are doing something, that are making a difference. Karl, I don't know if you know, but I last year I said I had gone to a seminar and came back and just was really excited about doing podcasts. And I said I was going to interview 100 Black men last year in 2024.
Right.
I ended up doing 105, which just made it even better that, now I'm probably at 140 now after this year as we just continue to grow and continue to understand folks. And so I'm so excited to have you on. So we can continue to chop it up on some wonderful things, but I can't wait to hear your story. I just think, like yesterday, I was able to interview a gentleman that had a really good attitude. He was like, I forgive everybody, I'm okay. He came out of Chicago, was arrested and convicted for a double homicide.
Yikes.
And when that double homicide happened, he happened to be in jail, and he still spent 19 years before they figured out that there's no way he could have been there because he was locked up. And so then you think of our systems and the things that, that folks argue, and then they did a civil trial and realized he couldn't have done the things because he was not in a position to do it.
Right.
But he had a good attitude, right? He was still happy. He was still excited. He was still, he's been out now for about 11 years. But at the same time, he's in his 50s. He went in at 22 or 20 years old and spent, 20 to 40, which were some of our most formative years.
For sure.
Where he was, and knowing that he didn't commit the crime, that was impossible to do it, and nobody would listen. It's not a good attitude. So that's why I so enjoy, the opportunity that I get to have, folks like yourself that are on. I've asked Karl to tell a story because I can't wait to hear all the wonderful things that he's done, that he's going to continue to do. And then we're going to talk about our pillars and just have some fun together today. So, Karl, thank you for being on. Thank you for spending your time with me during this hour. And we will talk. Yeah, go ahead. Just go ahead and tell your story, and we'll go from there.
All right. Thanks, Brian. I appreciate it. And first of all, I really appreciate that invitation. Came as a little bit of a surprise, but I hope that what I have to say will bring some value to your listeners. So essentially, and again, just by way of introduction, my name is Karl Darden, and I am a former Navy veteran. I've spent 20 years on active duty, both active duty and in the reserves. And I actually come from a military background. My father was an Air Force veteran, and he served for 20 years from the mid 50s to the mid 70s, and that included a tour in Vietnam. And he flew helicopters. He's a search and rescue helicopter pilot, and just saved countless lives while he was in service. And it was probably that military background that kind of formed the foundation for who I ended up becoming, because my dad, he had a particular, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, code that he lived by. And it was basically, putting the family first, doing everything he could to make sure that they, got every opportunity to get them to make themselves better. And but the other side of it was also just making sure that we understood that we had to meet a certain standard in his mind, and that part of that meant never giving up on anything. Always, showing proper respect to everybody, and just never setting a goal and just basically going after it, essentially. And that's kind of how I grew up. We spent time moving all over the place. I mean, I was born in Las Vegas, moved to Italy, actually learned to speak Italian before I spoke English. Came back to the States when my dad was in Vietnam, forgot how to speak Italian because everybody made fun of us. And then when he came back from Vietnam, we went from Maine to Florida to South Carolina and then out to Denver when he retired. So we were all over the place. And the things that got me through were just a love of sports. I mean, I did pretty well in school, but it was like sports like baseball and basketball that really kind of kept me going. And I think that I would say that my first time when I really felt like I felt like I could do something in baseball actually when I was like 9 years old, because I couldn't really hit a baseball for 2 years. It was just like, close your eyes and swing,
Yeah.
But my dad constantly worked with me, and he wasn't even really a big sports guy, to tell you the truth. But the fact is, he knew that it mattered to me. So we went out there and we had a little plastic wiffle ball and I had the bat, and he just threw me ball after ball after ball. And then, that in conjunction with getting on a good team with a coach that could really teach hitting made all the difference in the world. So that was kind of my first exposure into not giving up, because I was really this close to just saying, forget it. I don't want to do this anymore. So, that was part of it. And then kind of fast forwarding, getting to high school again, I didn't really have a lot of issues academically. I mean, I felt like things kind of came to me all right, but I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do beyond high school. And it was, I think, between my freshman and sophomore year that a neighbor of ours came up to me, and I was walking my dog. I'll never forget this. I tell this story a lot when people ask me how I got interested in the Naval Academy. He hands me this catalog on the U.S. Naval Academy, and I'd heard of it because I watched Army Navy games in the past. And he said, "Hey, Karl, take a look at this. I think you might be interested in what it has to say." So I said, "Okay, thanks, Mr. Williams. I appreciate it." So I went home. And again, this was a catalog. You don't typically read catalogs cover to cover, right? You just kind of flip through them and focus on different areas. But that one I did, from the very start all the way through. And I read it in like less than a couple of days, right on through to what the requirements were for the different majors and so forth. I mean, just the whole 9 yards. And that was when, and I remember, like I said, this was in the summer of 77. And I told my parents, I said, that's where I want to go to school. And from that point on, nothing got in my way in terms of making sure that I was going to put myself in a position to be the most competitive. And that meant taking all the right classes, putting everything else aside, including, somewhat of a social life or whatever. But at the end of the day, my thing was I want to get accepted to the academy, and because I thought it just provided all kinds of great opportunities. And fortunately for me, the hard work paid off. I got admitted with the class of 1984. And showed up in Annapolis in July of 1980. And I'm not gonna lie to you, it was a rough 4 years. I majored in engineering, and I did it. I did it not necessarily because I loved engineering. I did it because I read this stat that said 4 out of 5 graduates from the Naval Academy have engineering degrees, and I just said, okay, that's me then. I'm gonna be an engineer, and that's not to say that had I majored in history or whatever, I'm not saying like history was like an easier major or anything like that, because you still had to take professional courses, engineering courses, if you were a major like in humanities. All English majors, all history majors had to take some level of thermodynamics, electrical engineering, things like that. But the history definitely did come easier to me. And I think I probably would have done a little bit better academically had I gone that route. But I'm not sorry that I went the engineering route, because it kind of gave me the foundation of how I think and process information today. And anyway, finished up at the academy, ended up getting a slot to go to flight school. And I ended up flying helicopters just like my dad. Spent 9 years on active duty, transitioned into the reserves, spent 11 years in the reserves. And then during that time, I also went to work in the corporate world for Johnson & Johnson, where I was there for, I think I was with them for 19 years, doing everything from sales training, sales management, all that kind of stuff. And finished up with Johnson & Johnson in 2016. Ended up working on my own as an energy management consultant for a few years, and was building up a little bit of a book of business. And then COVID hit and basically just wrecked that opportunity altogether. And then I started thinking to myself, if I can just find something to kind of keep paying the bills for a couple more years. Then my Navy retirement pay kicks in. I was already getting my J&J pension. And then I can, if I could do that, then I could kind of relax and then just start doing stuff for me. Right. So I ended up calling up my kids' local junior, well, where they went to junior high, and I just asked them, "Hey, how are you guys fixed for math teachers, substitute math teachers and stuff like that? Because I can teach anything all the way up through trigonometry, you know." And they said, "Hey, by all means, we have a shortage, and of course with COVID, they just definitely needed the help." So I did that for a few years. Not that often. I would probably pick up about maybe 10 days a month or something like that. And then just recently, I just kind of stepped away from that, and I'm just doing straight up one-on-one tutoring with kids. And I do have 4 or 5 students right now. One Hispanic, one young African American high school freshman girl that she's doing a lot better now, and then a couple other kids as well. So that kind of keeps me busy. I feel like I'm kind of giving something back, and so yeah, that's basically my story. I think you're on mute, Brian. I can't hear you.
Well, how did I do that? How did I accidentally do that? Oh my gosh, what a world we live in. Thank you for letting me know. Well, and thank you for working with the kids. I mean, sometimes we believe that success means that you change the world, right? Like millions of people at a time. And
Right.
sometimes it's just the 1 or 2 people that you make a difference in, and then they go make a difference. And then that just springboards and move on. I kind of feel like it's helicopter month. And the reason I say that is like last week I interviewed, her name was Marcy Ng, Marcella Ng, and she was the first Black female helicopter pilot in the Army, I believe.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. And so, and how you just told your story, right? So I tell them, I guess, right, go ahead and tell your story. Well, Marcy went for about 1 hour and 15 minutes when she started telling me all the things that she had to go through, to be this pilot in the Army, and the things that, the hurdles she had to go through. And what an amazing story that she told. And now I get to hear about your dad, and then I get to hear about, who sounds like he was an amazing man. And, I know you just lost him recently, and sorry for your loss there, but it just sounds like he gave you like an identity, and, kind of shaped who you were. What I found out, when we were talking before, that Karl and I we grew up in the same town, probably within 4 or 5 miles of each other.
No doubt.
Arapahoe Road 925 is where my dad was part of an affirmative action program with the telephone company, and then he was in the reserves. And so I spent I don't think you can do this now, but he had his weekends where I would go spend his weekend, whatever it was that month, crawling on helicopters and getting into cockpits. And
right.
I don't think you can even come close to doing that. He was a photographer, so he had access to the whole base. Right. He would allow me to bring a friend like every his weekend every month, and I just got to play on a whole bunch of stuff. I'm sure it's not like that anymore.
Yeah, probably a few changes since then, but I think they do try to designate at least 1 day a year or something where you can, have like a career day like that.
Gotcha. But I do want to know. I want to hear about your identity, but maybe before we get to your identity and how that was shaped, I also want to hear you went to Annapolis, and in the early 80s. Which wasn't probably like the early 70s, but there still had to be some tension there. Or was it just we accept everybody gets to go for it, it's smooth sailing, and you're doing something academically that, hey, I don't know how many folks of color were graduating with engineering degrees in the early 80s.
Right.
Yeah. It was a ton. So maybe kind of tell me a little bit about, as it shaped your identity and who you were. Did you have to do more, I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, I think that to your point, it was the early 80s, and it wasn't nearly as tough as when obviously Wesley Brown graduated in 1947. He was the first Black graduate from the Naval Academy. But you could tell there's just depending on it was more subtle, I guess. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I just want to be completely upfront here. my experience at the Naval Academy was largely very positive. There was just
Okay.
a couple of little things that, you just kind of it basically hit you between the eyes, and you said, okay, that's how it is. I just got to be more aware, right?
Mhm,
And to
mhm.
be honest with you, I had to deal with things from time to time, but the women at the academy, I think, had it as tough, or maybe even tougher than I did in particular, because I mean, the class that I graduated with, 1984, that was the fifth class with women in it.
Okay.
So it was still a very, very new concept. And I saw just brazen examples of just mistreatment and just disrespect, on a pretty large level. And, I experienced it a little bit myself, but nowhere near on this scale. And I was at Annapolis just recently for my 40-year reunion. And I was happened to be just kind of observing the campus, and now it's just completely different. I mean, it's just like everybody's all integrated, and it's just like it's been like that for forever, and which is great to see, because
Yeah.
before, you just didn't see that, and that was unfortunate. But overall, I would say that the only time I really experienced any challenges is when, to be quite honest with you, when people got a little bit out of control. I mean, the drinking age was 18 back then. They bumped it to 21, but we were all grandfathered in. And certain times you would see people's true colors come through after they've had a couple of drinks. And
Yeah.
that's when you just say, okay, that's who you are. Good to know. You just move on from there and just make a note and press on.
Yeah. Oh my God, it's so cool. I can remember, like, when I went to a rival high school that was probably 10 miles, maybe not even 10 miles from the high school that you went to. And I can just remember at Cherry Creek, there was 3,500 students. You guys were way
Hmm.
less than that. You're probably half of that. And then we had 35 people of color
Oh
that
my
went
God.
to Cherry Creek High School. It was like that.
That's like
And I just happened
0.1%.
to be a pretty good athlete. Yeah, I happened to
Uh-huh.
be a pretty good athlete, so they loved me. I mean, I was, I was the important kid, right? That
Right, right.
you got to help us do football and track and that kind of stuff. But I can just remember, like, how many of us were in special eds, how many of us were,
Hmm.
that uh, like when I went to Walnut Hill High School or elementary school. So from elementary, I was in Cherokee School for all 12 years.
Hmm.
And I can remember just me and Ernie Pitts in the elementary school that I was at, and that's when I finally realized that I was black, when they were saying names and all that
Right.
kind of stuff. But overall, it was a good experience. I was mad at my dad for moving out of, like, Park Hill and that kind of stuff. When I was in high
Right.
school, God, how come I can't be, around people who look like me and that kind of stuff. But at the same time, he was pursuing a better education for me. He was
Yeah.
pursuing it. In his mind, it was important to integrate, because he wasn't able to do that in Kansas City, where he was
Right.
blessed in school. And he tells me stories of what it was like in Missouri when he was growing up in the 30s and 40s.
Hmm.
Like, oh my gosh, it was a mess. When we think about identity and becoming the man that you are today, what do you think? Were there different people or just experiences? Did you? And I don't know if you served in any of the wars flying helicopters, but what became who you were to believe you could do anything? I don't know how many pilots and stuff that there were, or how intensive it was.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I think that in terms of my identity, I kind of alluded to it before, that was largely shaped by my dad,
okay.
just in terms of the example he set. And I know that when I started going down that path to become a helicopter pilot, it almost kind of happened. It wasn't one of these things where I wanted to fly from the time I was 6 years old. It just
Yeah.
kind of evolved over time, and I realized that when I got experience to all the areas of the Navy, those being the ships, the submarines, the Marine Corps, and also aviation, uh, the the aviation, and then the helicopter community in particular
Yeah.
seemed to fit my personality the best. I mean, on some level, I'm a somewhat intense person, but I try to just kind of stay as relaxed as I can. And I think by and large, a lot of helicopter pilots tend to be like that. They're kind of laid back, they very professional, they get the job done and they know what they're doing. But there's not that same level of intensity as you might have with a jet pilot, which they need to have because they're trying to plant a speeding jet on an aircraft carrier that's moving at night, so more power to them. But but anyway, Yeah, I mean, I think my dad kind of shaped that a lot. And if I had to kind of define who I am, I would just say somebody who is just, quietly determined to do whatever it takes to complete a task. But I think that what I pride myself most on is I just, in terms of my reputation, is being known as somebody who is 100% reliable. And,
Mhm.
meaning that, hey, you need somebody to count on just for anything, just go to Carl. He'll figure out a way to get it done. Because for whatever reason, that makes me feel really, really good. And I'll give you a quick example of that. And it's really minor, but I was working through a problem with a young student. He's a fifth grader, I guess, the other day. And I was surprised that they were getting problems this challenging in the
Mhm.
fifth grade. I mean, I've seen them seen them getting in the seventh grade like that, but not in the fifth grade. And I was working through the problem and we came up with an answer. And I said, okay, well, this is basically how you work through it. But as we moved on to another problem, there's something that was kind of sticking in my head about the answer that we got. And I said, man, something is off there. I think I made a mistake and I can't remember I got to take some more time to look through it. So I kind of put that problem aside. We worked through the rest of it, rest of the lesson. Okay. And then I came back home and sure enough, there was a small mistake that I made that threw off the answer. And it was the incorrect answer
You
that I
made a
gave the kid.
mistake.
Yeah. So so I went back and I worked through the problem. In fact, I have it sitting right here on my desk. I worked through the problem step by step by step because I wasn't going to see the kid for another week, and I wasn't sure if he was going to
Mhm.
have a test or a quiz or something coming up. So I wrote it step by step as neat as I could. I took a picture of it and I texted it to his dad. I said, "Hey, Benji and I were working through a problem. Something kind of went sideways, and I didn't catch it until I got back home. Here's the corrected answer. Tell him to call me if he's got any questions." And he gave me a thumbs up, and we went on. But if I would have, if I would have just let that go, and I'd say, oh,
Mhm.
whatever, I'll just see the kid next week and correct it. No, that's not me. I got to fix it right then and there for me to be able to sleep at night. So that's the way it is. And so you can imagine that was my reaction dealing with a fifth grade math student. So if I'm dealing with adults on adult type issues or situations and stuff like that, you can bet that I'm going to do whatever it takes to to get the job
Make sure you get
done,
it
answer
right.
the
Yeah.
question, solve their problem, whatever.
That's so cool. I'm thinking of solving that problem with my kids. Me, the last math class I had was 10th grade, I think.
Hmm.
Uh, and I had, in college, I got to take astronomy. It counted as a math class. And so I got to know the summer solstice. And I love the fact that you work through that like an engineer would or should, where I would look at it and go, I ain't got nothing, son. Looks good to me. Oh my gosh, so that is so cool. Oh, but you were able to, which is really cool. What? So you retire from the Navy after 20 years. Now, did you fly all 20 years? Were you in aviation, a helicopter pilot for all 20 years, or did you move into something like engineering or something? Or
Yeah, so I was a helicopter pilot the whole time I was on active duty, and then
okay,
when I went into the reserves for those 11 years, I didn't fly because I didn't live. I did my reserve duty in Norfolk, Virginia, and
okay,
but I did not live there. I lived in either Raleigh, North Carolina, and for a while there I was in Baltimore. So I was having to drive to Norfolk for my reserve duty. And if you're going to be a pilot in the reserves, you almost have to kind of live in the city where you're doing your reserve duty because there's certain minimums that you got to maintain monthly and annually and stuff like that. And it's just going to be too hard. But I did get assigned to a unit that worked with air traffic controllers. So it was aviation related. And
uh-huh.
we essentially went out on other amphib ships, and we were part of the component that handled bringing the aircraft on board. And maybe they're going into like a hot zone or something like that, and you'd be communicating with the forward air controllers on making sure they got in and out of there safely, that sort of thing. And to answer your question, or to answer what you wondered about earlier, I did not. I was basically just getting ready to transition to an instructor squadron when Desert Storm jumped off in the early 90s. And they did put my orders on freeze until they kind of determined their manpower requirements. And it turns out that I didn't have to go. I actually served with a lot of guys who came back from there. And to be honest with you, my job as a combat support pilot, uh, as a Navy combat support pilot, would not have been one that involved flying into hot zones or anything like that. There would have been a lot of resupply and stuff like that. But for me, the most challenging thing, because I was single at the time, I wasn't married, so my biggest challenge would have just been shutting down my apartment and and going over there, because the actual job that I would have had would have been probably unremarkable by most people's standards, and but you just took satisfaction in knowing that what you were doing was helping somebody else. So
You have kids, right?
yes, I have a daughter who's finishing up at the University of Arizona, and my son is going through a local junior college before he transfers to Arizona State.
Nice. And so, and the reason I ask that, because one of the themes that has come from doing all these podcasts, one was, I guess the first thing was, we say that we need to find people, that look like us to know that we could do some of the things that are out there.
Right.
As you say, as I graduated, I don't need to, I don't need to see, people look like me. I can do anything. I can be anything. I can, my dad instilled all that in me. And then I went to my journey to freedom started because I went to a seminar that had 400 or 500 people in it. And I find myself counting how many people of color in the room. Like,
right.
Yeah. So I say it wasn't important, but it's important enough for me to count every time I go to a room. Right? So it does count, to me. But then the second thing that has come up is, what does it mean to be a dad and the responsibility of a dad? Because sometimes we get such a, and probably rightly so in some circles where, we hear all these like deadbeat dads, and we hear all these, dads who don't take responsibility. And I think we all believe, I haven't met anybody yet that doesn't believe that every child should have a dad growing up and have what you and I had, where we had our dads the whole time. Neither one of us had, we're from single parent families. But so I know a lot of people that I interview who have. And one of the things is, you have our kids need a dad, but what it means to be a dad and how it changes how we interact in life when we have that responsibility of protection and provision. And, I think some of the decisions that I know a lot of the decisions that I made as a dad when my kids were younger were probably different than I would have made had I not been a dad.
Yeah.
Maybe you talk about what it means to be a dad and
I agree with that. And I remember talking with a friend of mine from Johnson & Johnson years ago, because she was having a kind of a rough time with her marriage, and she had just had a kid. And she said that she asked me, she goes, well, what was it like when your daughter was born? Lena was born in 2002, and then Ethan was right behind her about a year and a half later. And I said, that's a good question, because I remember being in the delivery room with my wife, Winnie. And I just remember when Lena was delivered and I saw her for the first time, it was almost like this switch was flipped in my head that basically said, that is my number one priority now, period, end of sentence. And of course, it was reinforced when my son Ethan was born. So basically, to me, being a dad meant probably somewhat similar to what it meant for my dad to have two sons and a daughter as well. And that was to do whatever you could to give them every opportunity to succeed. And the pride I get is seeing them, hit that mark. For my daughter, it was just all kinds of little milestones when she was in high school. She wanted to go to a high school that was kind of tough it was kind of like an admissions sort of thing. And she battled pretty hard in junior high, but she insisted that she wanted to go there, and she got accepted. And it was a charter school. It wasn't a public school or anything like that. Out here in Arizona, there's more charter schools than public schools, and the public schools, some of them are okay, most of them aren't. But that's not to say that all the charter schools are all that great either. It just kind of depends on who the teachers are. But anyway, this one happened to be pretty good, and it had like an agricultural and agri-science type of angle, which she really liked because she liked animals and stuff like that. And then she decided she wanted to go to University of Arizona because they had a really great program. And I didn't have to lift a finger in terms of just, the applications process and everything. She did everything. And she just said, Dad, you got to sign here. You got to do this. You got to do that. Next thing you know, boom, she gets accepted, and then she's on her way. And then, so that was one of my proudest moments when she got accepted there. And of course, that's going to be eclipsed when she graduates in the spring here. And then for my son, Ethan, his personality is, a little bit different. He's not nearly as intense as my daughter is. But he's, pretty bright kid. And I just remember with him, it was just, watching him stay determined to do something, just kind of like how I was. All right. I'll give you an example. He was born in December, and we started him in school early. So he was a very young ninth grader when he went into high school. Okay. He was still 13 years old. He didn't turn 14 until December of that year. And consequently, when he was playing basketball, he was tracking physically a little bit behind everybody else because they were all a year to year and a half older. But he made the freshman team, and although he didn't start, he got some good playing time, and he was a good contributor. And then what happened was, in the next year, they didn't have a sophomore team. It just went from freshman to JV to varsity, right? So you had to skip. You're skipping basically a year there, but really for him physically, it was 2 years because now he's just turned 15. Everybody else is probably 15 going on 16, especially if they started late anyway, because you know how it is with the kids these days. Sometimes they hold them back a year early so they can get that physical advancement. So, and his growth spurt hadn't started yet. Well, he didn't make the JV team as a sophomore. He got cut. And I remember the day that I picked him up, and I said, so how'd it go? He goes, I didn't make the team. And I said, oh man, I'm really sorry to hear that. And then there was just like a little bit I didn't say anything. I just wanted to see how he was going to react. And he says, I'm going to go out again next year. And that was the best thing that he could have ever said to me. Those are the words I was hoping would come out of his mouth. And I said, okay, well, cool. Well, we'll make a plan and then we'll start going. So we just went to Luke Air Force Base or the YMCA or wherever to shoot baskets. We looked up stuff online that would help him develop his skills even more as a point guard and as a shooting guard. And long story short, not only did he make the team as a junior, but then as a senior, he ended up being the captain and the most valuable player. So that was all because he just didn't give up, And so that was when he was named the MVP, that was a pretty proud moment for me because I knew what it took for him to get there. You know what I mean? So as far as dad moments go, those were the two biggest ones to date for me. And I'm sure they're going to be more to come in the future, but I just take a lot of satisfaction in knowing that, hey, they actually did listen to at least something that I told them at some point along the way, So,
and they surprise you so much, and similar to like what your dad. You said your dad went out and did the baseball thing for you and helped you swing baseballs, and you went out and helped your son be better at basketball. And so I was a track guy, so I was able to really understand and been coaching track for 38 years. And I can remember when my son decided, like I think it was 7th grade or 8th grade, he decided he was going to play baseball. Well, he had missed all those years when you're 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, playing baseball and all the kids who knew. And I don't know. I mean, I know baseball. I'm a PE teacher, so I obviously know the sport, but I'm not a enthusiast of baseball.
Right.
They're doing stuff. And, he goes and plays and they put him out in left field. They don't let him bat. The coach actually gets suspended for 3 games for not playing him and letting him go on the bat. And Jeez. I still make him go through all these games. But unlike the champion that you are, I'm not helping him learn baseball. I'm not practicing with them. I'm not doing any of those things. I'm like, we're done with baseball. And then the coach's son and their family was so mad at me and so mad at my son because their dad got, he's the manager, he's the coach, and now he can't even show up to the games because of my son is being so bad. And then I finally get my son to go do track, right? And so that I know, that I can spend time, that I can help him with. He ends up being 2nd in the state of California in high jump, and he gets a scholarship and all that kind of stuff. And the coach's son is The coach's son doesn't get to do anything. He's not very good. I don't even know if he made, the baseball team his senior year. And I see him, and this is a proud moment as me as a dad, but not probably my best moment as interacting with that coach, because like being an Indian or my son has got this and but you just think of those things, because I was so like you were saying, so proud to be a dad.
Mhm.
And I think my self-worth, because I was able to be a dad,
Mhm.
increased tenfold, because I
Right.
thought I was doing the things. Now, obviously, I don't think I was the best parent that was alive, and super dad and being able to do everything. But it was so important to say, hey, I am a dad. I'm taking care of my responsibility as a dad. And these little humans, I have a responsibility of how their life shows up. And the
Right.
older they get, and as you'll like, my oldest is 36 now, and he works for Pixar, and so I'm the proudest dad that I got a son that works for Disney or whatever it
Right.
is.
Right.
And we just happen to have 8 children, and so all of them I can go and brag on. But it's like,
Mhm.
there's not one that I wouldn't say is the greatest kid on the planet and is doing phenomenal things, but they just keep surprising me.
Yeah.
And it's, okay, so, but I kind of look at that as my self-worth. Now, the next part of that is your relationship with your wife,
Mhm.
and what does it mean to be this amazing husband that is able to do this in conjunction and take care of these kids? What are some of the things that compelled you to love your wife the way that you did, or do?
Yeah. She's still around. She's still here.
you know that made a difference, that also ignited your self-worth and who you are.
Right. Well, so uh, my wife and I met in 1998.
Okay.
So I was already in my mid 30s then, and I'd not been married before or anything like that. And she's originally from Chicago, and in fact, that's where she is right now. But she's a flight attendant, so she spends a lot of time going to and from and that sort of thing. And early on, when we met, I got a really good sense for who she was, because she was always uh, and I kind of think of thing in terms of just being a helicopter pilot. You always like to have a good crew, and that starts with having a good co-pilot. And she was always that. If I can draw the analogy, I mean, whenever I needed something to be done while I was at work or whatever, she was able to kind of cover off on that for me. And when we get together, it was almost like we joke around a lot. I said, sometimes I think I just married you for the entertainment value, because she is really, really funny, and just is always cracking me up. I mean, there can be times where I can be in a really, not the most terrific of moods, and then she'll walk in and she'll say something or do something, and it'll just have me cracking up. So I think that that was the thing that really first attracted me to her. And then as our marriage has evolved, I mean, we'll be married, 25 years come April the 8th. And we've assumed different roles, right? I mean, when I was working for Johnson and Johnson, I did a fair amount of traveling, not crazy traveling, but enough to the point where at some point I had to kind of put a stop to it and just make sure I was at home more. Um, but and during that time, she spent most of the time working around my schedule. All right, she'd only work on the weekends. Maybe she'd only do 2 trips a month. She's a flight attendant for United Airlines. She'd only
Okay.
do like 2 trips a month. And then when I kind of started going through this transition with Johnson and Johnson, we had a conversation, and I said, "Hey, look, uh, I'm probably going to be stepping away from J&J. I'm going to try and do my own thing. We're set up okay to do this right now, and I certainly wouldn't put the family at risk to do this, but you're going to need to start working a little bit more. And then, of course, our roles will basically shift in the household. I'll take over more the stuff that's done around here, and then until the business gets up and running, then she's going to be gone a little bit more often and stuff like that." And she says, "Okay, no problem, can do." In fact, I think she actually wanted to do that for even a longer period of time, because for whatever reason, and I could never talk her out of this, she always felt like she wasn't holding up her end of the bargain in the marriage in terms of just what she was bringing to the table. I said, don't you understand? I said, I said, what you're doing, you can't really put a price on, right? I mean, in terms of just making sure that, Lena and Ethan don't wind up on drugs or,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. I mean, I was doing my part when I was there, but I mean, if I'm gone at a national meeting for 4 days at a time or 5 days at a time, she's the one looking after them, and conversely, when I was trying to get my business up and running, and then she was working more often, the kids were still in high school, which is obviously a very formative time. So it was my job to make sure that they stayed out of trouble and, we're doing the right thing. So it all kind of balances out. And I think that that's one reason why, after 25 years, we're still going pretty strong. I mean, we've had our little bumps in the road here and there, but it all comes back to, okay, she's a great co-pilot. She's probably the only woman on the planet who can put up with me, so she's not going anywhere. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, and understanding that there's sacrifices. One of the things that I'm doing now is I'm doing a podcast on Sunday nights. It's called Why Love Waits, and we have 5 men and 5 women that we're talking about the family unit and how, whether it was systematically dismantled or just over time, where I look at the Black family, like during segregation,
right?
It was super strong. It was, the education system was amazing. Our Black kids were learning so much more. Then we do this, we abolish segregation and we do integration and we start busing kids and we're sending our kids to schools that they're not wanted at. They get stuck back in classrooms, and then we have war on drugs, all the things that have kind of dismantled family. And the statistic now is 50% of Black women over the age of 40 have never been married. And of that 50%, 75% of them have children. And there's this belief now that for Black women, as I'm doing this, that their moms taught them, don't trust men. Don't, make sure you have a separate bank account. Make sure you have, that you have it out, and for the men, they're like, well, I don't know if I ever want to get married because then I'll have to give her half. And you're like, well, you're planning on it falling apart before you get there. And there's just this conflict. And I love to highlight relationships that work, because that's another clue that I'm finding in most of these, conversations where I'm having with successful Black men is the family unit, and the ones that have worked like crazy to be with their kids and do everything, and they're treating their queens like these amazing men can. The Black family seems to just do so much better. And how do we fix it, or just share the values that you guys must have had, because nobody said it's been easy. Nobody said it's like this, it's just fairy tale land, but it's been work, and the sacrifice has been well worth it. I believe God put us into, and just said, hey, we were meant for each other. We weren't supposed to be alone for our whole lives. And so, I just appreciate the fact that, hey, you've worked at it. The way that you talk about your wife, the way that you, I can tell that the love is there.
Yeah.
You're doing those things.
Well, I first of all, that was a pretty staggering stat that you just laid on me there. I did not know that. And I tell you that I think a lot of it has to do with, the people not getting together or whatever. But I think it all has to do with putting in the work, right? I mean, nothing, I don't think it's a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. Nothing worthwhile is ever easy. But I tell you, the level of satisfaction that I get and the level of gratitude that I feel when my wife and I hit certain milestones, whether it has to do with the raising of our kids or just doing things together. I mean, one of the things we do, not every single year, but most times, is that every spring in March, we live about 5 hours, well, not 5, about 3.5 hours from Palm Desert, California. And every year they have the one of the major tennis tournaments on the WTA and the ATP tour there at Indian Wells. And we've gone there probably about 5 times since like 2016. And then we'll make the trip back again this spring. And that's just a really fun thing for us. It's about a month before our anniversary. And we both love tennis. I mean, she's probably a little bit more addicted to it than I am, although I started playing before she did. But when I come home, usually the tennis channel is on. right? And but when we go, I mean, we get our money's worth. We show up as soon as it opens, and we're usually there for like 2 days. We pick usually 2 days early on in the tournament so we can see the most stars. Um, but we get there right as soon as it opens, and we don't leave until the last match is done. So the hotel, we're just there to sleep. I mean, so for 2 days we're doing that, and it is just so much. It's so worthwhile. It's so much fun to enjoy that time together in a sport that we both really enjoy playing. Uh, so yeah, I mean, those are the really good times and stuff like that. And I just think that these days there's not the same level of my old geometry teacher used to say stick to itiveness when it comes to doing
Yeah,
things.
yeah, yeah.
And I think that unfortunately some people, they could be on the verge of having a really good relationship, but something happens to derail it and they just don't put in the work to get it back on track.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So I have to ask you, since you guys are such enthusiasts of tennis, what do you feel about pickleball?
Oh, I hate it. my wife is a little bit more tolerant. Okay, I mean, she's actually played it before, and when she said that she's going to play with a friend of hers back in Chicago, I looked at her and I said, "You are dead to me."
I knew that was coming. Part of it is like my generation's fault, because when I started teaching PE and Marine about high school in 1990, that was the unit that was my favorite unit, was the pickleball unit. We started teaching, this generation is playing it now, pickleball. And here's the reason, because when I do my tennis unit, I was chasing balls the whole time.
Right,
when I
right.
do my pickleball unit, I can put those little wiffle balls and we do it in the gym. It could be cold. And so I just like doing pickleball because I didn't want to chase the balls around after class all the time. Not that it was bad, but it was so much easier to teach a kid who wants nothing to do with PE.
That's right.
It's to get him to play tennis.
Well, here's my philosophy on pickleball. Okay, if you are an avid tennis player and you've played tennis for years and years and years, and you got to the point where, you know what, the joints just can't take it anymore, I'm going to go ahead and transition to pickleball, you get cut a lot of slack by me. Okay, I have no issues with you whatsoever. The ones that the people I have an issue with is the people who never even tried tennis and just like picked it up and started. Because what that is saying to me is, you know what, I refuse to put any effort at all into learning this sport, that basically pickleball is halfway based on. You know what I mean? And I just said, I just told her, I said, I won't play. You don't ask me to be a partner because I just won't do it.
So, oh my gosh. I have a cousin who's, I don't know, 7 or 8 years older than me. And when I was teaching pickleball, I tried, back in the 90s. Oh no, I got to play, I got to do all these. I'm a baller. I'm all this, right? And now he's like the pickleball club guy. He's like, everything I see on Facebook is, as if he just learned this whole new sport that didn't exist. And I'm like, we started trying to get you to play, and you thought it was stupid. Now, he even put together like a pickleball cruise or something like that. He's got all these people that are going to go on a cruise so they can play pickleball.
Oh man,
yeah,
that's funny.
I'm just so surprised it's on TV now, and
oh yeah, they got an old channel now.
Yeah, yep. It's like, it is so amazing. My favorite restaurant is in Palm Desert at the JW Marriott, which is the Mikado, where you go into the you go into the lobby there and you take the boat out to the restaurant. I haven't been there in so long, so
wow,
I have to get out there and do this stuff. Before I go, is there I want to kind of talk about health a little bit. What are you doing to make sure, not just physically, but mental health as well? I know, as being a military person, you weren't in combat, but you still probably interacted with a whole lot of people that were. Are there things that you do to just make sure your mental health is maintained or your physical health is maintained? Because we want to live like Black men are supposed to die like when we're 72. Yeah, that's like the average age. My dad's 86 now, and he's still running track meets. So I want to live to 100.
Yeah.
What are you doing to maintain your health?
Well, yeah, you bring up a good point when you put in the mental health as well, and that's one thing that I can probably start focusing on a little bit more. I've never really felt like that was a huge issue for me in terms of just getting down on things and stuff. But my dad passing a month and a half ago impacted me pretty hard, and I think that it's important to kind of recognize that and just deal with it. And the way I've been dealing with it is, my mom, they would normally come down here to Arizona from Denver for 5 months out of the year. They'd come in right around Christmas time, and they'd leave to go back to Denver in May. And they came down this time, and unfortunately, it was when my dad passed away when he got down here within like 2 weeks. And so my mom is still here, and I make it a point to go visit with her every day. My dad, he died just shy of his 90th birthday, and my mom is 86. And so I spend at least 2 hours a day over there with her. My brother is visiting from California, and he's been there with her for the last 3 weeks. He's heading back home on the 20th, but then my sister is coming out from Alexandria on Sunday. I'm picking her up at the airport. She's going to stay for a week. And then the plan there is just for them to, or at least my sister anyway, come out 1 week a month for at least the next 4 or 5 months.
Okay.
And my brother will come out, whenever he can. And of course, I'll be here basically the whole time while she's here in May. So with me, that's how I've been kind of dealing with the loss, is just, keeping my dad alive in our conversations and stuff like that. And just remembering different stories that really told you what he was all about, that sort of thing. Physically, I've always been, a big physical fitness guy, whether it's weightlifting or different sports or running. I did recreational running for a long time. I finally stopped doing that about we'll call it 4 months ago. I think I ran my last 4 miles or whatever. And now my aerobic activity is being accomplished by using my rowing machine. So a general week for me in terms of physical fitness looks like, okay, jump on the rowing machine 2 or 3 times a week for about 30 to 45 minutes. And then 2 days a week of resistance training to include things like, I'm not not the exercises that athletes would typically do. Yeah, there's some of that, but more or less the ones that are going to allow us to maintain a good productive life as we get into our later years, so that means things that focus on stability and balance and certainly strength, because you want to keep your bone density up as much as you can. And then of course, with my dad, he had a history of heart disease and so forth. So my cardiac health is extremely important to me. Just making sure I do things to maintain that. What's so frustrating sometimes is that medicine can be so contradictory sometimes, right? I mean, I meet with my cardiologist once every 6 months. I mean, that's how serious I am about making sure that everything is on track. And, we talk about different diets and stuff like that, which aren't a real challenge for me to kind of convert to, because like I said, I'll do what it takes. And so one of the things they talk about for, good cardiac health is, maybe don't eat so many peanuts, but focus on like almonds and pistachios and stuff like that. Those are really good from a protein perspective. And they're kind of good for cardiac health in terms of just what they provide. And I said, okay, cool. I can do that. No problem. So then a few weeks ago, I go to my urologist, and I just recently had a scan to make sure everything is looking good there. And he says, yeah, we saw a couple of little minor kidney stones. He goes, you probably won't have any trouble passing them or anything like that, but I just want to make you aware of them. And I said, okay, well, what can I do to make sure that I minimize that issue? And he goes, well, the first thing you want to do is stay away from nuts.
Oh, God. Don't eat almonds, don't eat pistachios. Oh, God.
I'm not going, really? I mean, give me a break, man. You just can't win. You can't win for losing. I swear. It's just crazy sometimes.
We all have to eat like the Matrix, just mush all the time, because that's the only thing that,
right.
Don't eat this, don't eat this. You can eat this, but don't eat,
Right. So, but yeah, physical fitness is just really, really important to me. And like I said, I try to do something. In fact, I'm trying to teach this to my son and daughter too. Well, mostly my son, because my daughter gets her exercise in different ways, working with the animals out on the farm and stuff like that. But I tell my son, I said, Ethan, you want to get to the point where if you don't work out and even if it's just like playing basketball or whatever, if you don't work out for like 5 days, then it really makes you feel weird, and you might even get a little bit irritable or whatever. But that to me is where I am right now in my life, is it's like if I go more than 3 or 4 days without doing something, then unless I'm sick, then something's wrong. I gotta get back on track.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Well, thank you for spending the time. Is there anything that we didn't get to talk about today that you really wanted to make sure that our listeners or the people that will interact with it, with this video, to know or to do or to think about.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that one of the things I do in my free time is I produce a sports podcast that showcases athletes at the Naval Academy, and I do this because a lot of people don't know about the Naval Academy. Number one, um, a lot of people don't realize that it is in fact a 4-year institution. Somebody was asking me about the Army Navy game one time, and they actually thought they didn't understand how the Army Navy game got played because they thought that once a year, people from the Army and the Navy just got together and practiced for about a month, and then they played a game.
Oh God!
they didn't realize it was two schools, that compete. So. And the fact is, we have a lot of elite athletes, and their stories usually just go untold because nobody knows about them. And certainly, you're not going to see. I mean, there's going to be certain exceptions. I mean, David Robinson is probably the most famous athlete of color to graduate from the Naval Academy and go on to become a world champion, an Olympic champion, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But there are other athletes who participate in sports that you don't hear too much about. Sports like rowing, for example. I'm a huge rowing fan, right? And the Naval Academy's got a great program there. Rugby, they're national champions 2 years ago in rugby, beating the University of California, Berkeley, in the finals. And then swimming and diving and track and field. I'm a big track and field nut. And just being able to tell their story in addition to sharing what they have to deal with while they are there, right? I mean, I've told people this 100 times, that when those athletes get out there to compete on the football field, basketball court, out on the water if they're rowing, or in the pool if they're swimming, on the tennis court, whatever. There's 36 varsity sports, by the way, at Annapolis. That is the easiest part of their day, going out there and competing, because it's kind of where they get away from everything else that's going on academically and professionally and stuff like that. So I think it's important to be able to showcase those young men and women and basically hold them up as an example for others who may want to aspire to become, officers in the Navy and the Marine Corps, and just showing, hey, not only can you do that, but you can do this too. And it really does make you a more well-rounded individual. And that's why I like doing it. The podcasts come out roughly every 2 to 3 weeks. I just put one out the other day on our national champion rowing team in 1984 that won a national championship. And my two guests were two classmates of mine who were on that team and rowed in that boat. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. And I try to highlight the athletes of color as much as I can as well. One of the athletes I had on a couple of years ago, she was just a fantastic track star. Her name was Molly Mangan, and we had a great conversation, and just her name is just peppered all over those record books at the Naval Academy in terms of indoor and outdoor track. She was really something.
Wow, that's neat. So how do they get to it? How do folks get to your?
So the name of the podcast is Navy Sports Central, and you can find it on anywhere you listen to podcasts. It's in every directory out there. But yeah, just type that into a search and it'll pop up. And we also have a group Facebook page that it's a private page, but if you're that interested in Navy sports, all you got to do is just find it on Facebook. Just type in Navy Sports Nation, and it'll bring you up. Just answer a couple of questions that get you in, and that's just a really good way to follow Navy sports. We got 2 big games coming up tomorrow in basketball against Army, and to be quite frank, we need to win both of those to really have a shot at winning our annual competition, because we compete in 26 sports overall, and Navy's won that competition probably 8 or 9 years in a row. This year we got to kind of a slow start, and we were behind 9-3 until about 2 weeks ago, and then we won all 4 sports that day, indoor and outdoor. We won men's and women's indoor track. We won that. We won rifle, and then we won what was the other one? Gymnastics. So that got us to 9-7. If we can win both basketball games, that'll get us even. We don't necessarily have to win both of them, but winning both of them with wrestling coming up next week would be a bonus, so we'll see.
Well, thank you so much for being part of the podcast today. Thank you for sharing your story and just being vulnerable with all the things that you have. And so, I would say just check out his podcast and check out who are some athletes that you may not know about, or some of the best in sports that we can find. And so if you found this particular episode interesting, go ahead and share it with somebody you think that might benefit from it. I would say go ahead and subscribe, because when you subscribe, you get to see all the different guests that we have. And I promise you, over the 130 some that we have, you will absolutely find somebody somewhere that you can identify with, that you can say, hey, if that person can do it, I can do it too. Or if that can be happening, all the wonderful things that we get from having these conversations and being, in relationship with each other.
Right.
So you have any closing thoughts?
No, I think that'll do it. I would like to reiterate, one of the things we spoke about in terms of just physical health. I read a book called Outlive just recently, and the doctor's name that wrote it escapes me right now, but he's an oncologist, and he speaks a lot to what I was alluding to before about making sure that you're maintaining, your physical health. And there's probably some discussion on mental health as well, because, we're roughly the same age group. And I think that as we get older, it's just going to be really, really important to have a quality life for as long as you can have it. And that's one of the things that was really great about my dad, is that he was going strong all the way until the very end. And that's the way you want to live your life. You want to be productive as you can for as long as you can. And, when it's time for you to go, then at least there's like no regrets or anything like that. To me, that's preferred, as opposed to just kind of hanging around and just existing because we just didn't take advantage of, staying in good shape early on.
Absolutely. The book he said was Outlive. We'll find it, or when I find it, I'll put it into the comments. And health is so important, because you want to enjoy your life, not exist in life. So,
that's right.
All right. Don't forget, you're God's greatest gift. He loves you if you allow him to. You guys have an amazing day, and we'll look forward to talking to you the next time.